Hello everyone! Welcome to How to Develop Growth, or I put it on the slide as Developing Growth, because that fits better. What kind of growth do we even want to talk about? I want to talk about any kind of growth to any metric that you might have as a company that you can measure. Whether that be how many users you gather, how many people you convert into paying customers, how many people use a specific feature, how many people interact with a marketing campaign, or ultimately, how much money you make. And why is it that some companies really excel at this and take off, while others are seemingly left in the dust when it comes to growing? Companies like Dropbox or Airbnb or Facebook found magic moments where they suddenly grew rapidly. And they all share a thing in common that I became really passionate about over the last couple of years. And that is a methodology called growth hacking. Growth hacking is really a structured approach to driving growth. It is the thing that, and the mindset that enabled Dropbox to come up with its referral program, that enabled Airbnb to take off by posting to Craigslist, and that helped Facebook internationalize out of the US market. And it's a very simple methodology that you can start applying today. And I want to walk you through how to do that and what this even is. And on the way, share some of my experiences. But who am I? My name is Hendrik. I like to call myself a JavaScript enthusiast, so that's what I do as a developer. An intrapreneur. I really like, especially in the recent years, to help companies grow from within, to develop, to find new ways of working together, and to grow. And I'm also a developer for the fun of it. I started to develop because I think developing is super fun. Building something myself, making sure that other people can use something that they enjoy and that makes their life easier is super fun. And I think growth hacking goes into the same direction. And I'm a consultant for Netlight. We're a Swedish consultant company, as the rumor and the myth goes, founded on the day of the cinnamon bun, the 4th of October. So if you like cinnamon buns, your day is coming up. But to kick this off, I would like for all of you to get out your smartphones and scan this QR code. And I will shut up for a bit and take a sip of water until a decent amount of you have done that. Just browse around. I blurred out part of the content so you don't get distracted too much, right? Okay, I still see some people browsing, but maybe we've got a good number of participants into our experiment, because growth is a lot about experimentation. So today, this was our experiment. Who of you saw the website on the left? Raise your hand. Okay, some people. Who saw the version on the right? Nice. So the allocation worked. That makes me very happy. So what do we see here? This is a fake version of Netlight's website. And I gotta come over here a little bit so I can scroll. On the left, you just see a section up top with a description, and then there's a bit like, what do we do, and some content. And on the right, there's an experiment we're currently running to hopefully gain more people that reach out to us, where you see a bit of a bigger reach out button, and then an image, and then the content of the website follows. You might have seen the light version of the website, but that shouldn't concern us here now. So this is only an example, right? That's not our actual website, that's just something I made up for this presentation. And I want to use this example to walk you through the process of how we came up with that idea to approach that growth of people that reach out to us. And we're going to do that in 3 steps today to make sure that we can take off. We're going to meet the team behind all of this, because the team is really important. We're going to dive down the funnel we use funnels a lot in growth and in marketing and all of these things, right? And then I want to give you some practical tips to take this home and start applying it today. Throughout the talk, there's going to be slides like this with orange text. That is your chance to ask a question. Right, we're also going to have time at the end, but if you have time in between, please feel free to raise your hand at orange text slides and ask a question. But first, let's meet the team. The team behind growth should be an interdisciplinary one, a diverse one. We're going to meet every participant here in a second. There was a talk earlier in this very cinema about complex problems and how they need diverse mindsets because we need to bring in perspectives from different angles. And finding growth opportunities for your company is a really complex problem. So that also benefits from quite a diverse group of people. And everybody in this team is involved in the entirety of the process that I will describe later on. There's no handovers or anything in between. There might be focus areas for people, but everybody should be involved everywhere to make sure we get all of these perspectives and we find novel ideas. So let's meet them in turn. The first person is the lead. The lead holds the team together. The lead ideally brings some experience on how to run growth initiatives, how to do all of this. They are the person that documents the process. They are the person that makes sure that meetings happen and that all of these managerial things, right, are taken care of. And ultimately, we need them to be the decision maker because we want to move fast, experiment, learn. We're going to look at that again and again. And for that, we need to make fast decisions. And this will be the role to do decisions if we can't agree. Then we have a designer. The designer is the person who can whip up designs for new features that we might want to try out, that we come up with. They often bring a feeling for the user and for their needs, and they can bring that perspective into ideation, and they understand the brand a little bit. And then there's the person who definitely understands the brand and how to talk about it and how we talk to our users. And that is the marketing expert, who can help us whip up campaigns on Google that bring in just the right people to our experiments, who can definitely help us write copy for our experiments, for our ads, for our features, and who can probably help us a little bit with analysis. But the true champion of analysis is the analyst, or data scientist, or data engineer, or whatever you might have at your company. Somebody who's really familiar with diving into your data's company, figuring out insights that you can gain there, maybe building some dashboards for you to see how your experiment is doing. We're also going to see that at the end. And last but not least, the developer. So this is me. Hello. The developer is on the team to implement some features into the product and to bring ideas on what would be easy to do, what would be hard to do, what might be some services out there that we can use, that we could really go into, right? Like Airbnb at some point figured out they could write a not so well received integration into Craigslist to post their things there, and that helped them take off before Craigslist forbade them to do that. But those are the people on our cross-functional team. And it's really important that they come from different domains within your company so that you can bring all of these perspectives together, create novel and new ideas out of connections that would usually not happen. And in that sense, growth teams can also help you bridge divides between your departments and break up silos. And somebody learned that this is an orange text slide.
Do we always need everyone for this cross-functional teams or just parts of it?
Yeah, so the question is, do we always need all of these people? Well, it depends, right? I think having as many of them as you can is really helpful. But in the end, if you can kick off with 1 or 2 people, better do it than not. We're going to come in the end for the practical tips to also going for low-hanging fruits. Okay. Then let's dive down the funnel of a growth experiment, of the one we saw earlier. It all starts with input. From somewhere we need to get input so that we can have ideas. And input can come from everywhere. It's just important that you know a little bit your focus, right? Maybe you want to increase how many people come to you. Maybe you want to increase how many people start buying. When you know that, it helps you to get the right input. And that input comes from different sources. It's your Google Analytics or whatever other alternative you're using. It's your customer interviews. It's your customer support telling you what's currently broken. It's just people in your company having really smart ideas. All of this is input, but it helps to know the focus area. So for our experiment that all of you were a part of today, the focus area was increasing reach out. So people that contact us. And one thing that I cannot say enough about this stage of the process is gather a lot. Like, if your team whips up a Miro board and at the end it's full of hundreds of post-its of things that you pull in, that's what you need. And we're going to see this repeated again and again. And we're going to talk in a bit about how to then filter out this mass of information, because this is going to be overwhelmingly much. But from it we first derive ideas. And growth ideas should always have 4 key things. The why. Why do we believe this idea is going to have an impact? The what. What is the idea actually? Like, what are we trying to do? Where are we trying to do this? Are we trying to change some text in some Facebook ads? Are we trying to change some text on our hero on the landing page? What are we doing? And then the most important thing maybe is a KPI, some sort of metric that you want to measure. Something that you can grow and measure whether you actually succeeded. And this is actually so important that at some point one of the teams I was on was having a song, what, where, why, and the KPI, right? And we were singing that all the time when we came up with new ideas to remind us that these are the things that need to be there. So how would that look like for our experiment? So on the left you see again the experiment we ran. And the idea here is connection increases reach out. Why did we think that would happen? So we believe users do not feel a connection with us and thus do not click reach out on the landing page. So the other version didn't have an image, didn't have the big reach out button, and we think users, visitors, they didn't feel a connection with us, so they didn't reach out. So what are we doing? To create connection with the user, we will add an image and simultaneously increase the reach out button to increase the visibility of that interaction. So we really think that, maybe you don't like us that much because you don't see us, so let us show you who we are. And how are we going to measure that? We will measure conversion, so how many people come there versus how many people take an action we desire, of the reach out button, and we will keep an eye on lead conversion. So there's 2 important aspects here. One, we have a KPI that we can clearly measure, how many people click the button. And we also track lead conversion. So we know that this experiment we are running might impact a metric further down the user journey. And we just want to make sure that we don't negatively impact that, because maybe now we get 10 times as many people and all our sales personnel are caught up in calls, but now only 1% converts instead of 5 that we had before. So that would be a waste of effort on our salespeople. We don't want that to happen, so we just track that while we run the experiment. And then it's time to find the gems that you want to do, right? So at this point, you've come up with ideas, you've gathered input a lot, then you came up with ideas. Once again, like a Miro board full of ideas is what we are sort of aiming for. And now we need to filter them down to the things that we actually want to execute on. Because our idea was, we will add an image there, we will increase the button size, so a developer will have to put some effort into making that happen, right? But how do we decide that this is the thing we want to work on? And just really, I'm going to repeat this one more time after this even, good ideas need many ideas. Whole Miro boards full of ideas, right? This always reminds me of my vacation, when my girlfriend tells me, hey, we should take 500 pictures so that we actually have some good ones. And as much as I don't like taking the 500 pictures, it leads to some really good ones. And with me just taking one picture of everything, that doesn't usually lead to any good ones. Same holds true here. So, how do we filter them? We apply some sort of rating mechanism. An easy one is the ICE score. We think about the impact, the confidence, and the ease of an idea. So the impact, how impactful do we think this is going to be for our users? How impactful do we think this is going to be on our metric? Then the confidence, how confident are we that this is going to have the impact we think it's going to have? And the ease, how easy do we think this is going to be? And for each of them, we rate it on a scale of 1 to 10. So for our example, we might say, actually, not sure how big the impact is going to be. Maybe a 4-ish. Pretty confident it's going to have some impact, so an 8 there. And the ease, this is a 9. I'm just going to add an image, and then I'm going to make the button a bit bigger. Not a big deal. So it will come out as a 7, and the ICE score will be a 7, and then that will be our first hint at what we might want to do first. It shouldn't be the deciding factor, this easy estimation, right? But it can be a hint to you and your team, what should you tackle? And this ICE score can just be done by the person who writes down the idea, right? They're gonna get it horribly wrong in the beginning, but it's not here to tell us how impactful something is, it's here to give us an idea on what can we experiment with? What do we believe in as a team or as a company? And over time, the growth team will learn to make better estimates, but estimates are always estimates. So don't trust in them, take them as an indication on what you might do. So, input and ideas. Good ideas need many ideas. And once you have many ideas, filter them down, be pragmatic about that. People can just maybe add an ICE score to ideas they propose, and then come up with a meeting where you decide which ideas to tackle next. And that is how our idea was prioritized to be executed on in our example scenario.
So if the ICE score is just an indicator, so what's then the deciding factor of making the final decision for which idea to go with?
Good question. So if the ICE score, the question was, if the ICE score is only an indicator, how do you make the final decision of what to go with? Well, we are being very pragmatic about that. So a technique that many teams use is everybody can pitch 2 or 3 ideas in a meeting. So you have maybe a weekly or bi-weekly meeting where you decide on next ideas you want to execute. Then everybody can nominate 2 or 3. Oftentimes you will have ideas that get nominated by more than one person, so you take those. Otherwise you look at them and you can often just have a talk about it or then look at the ICE score or do a dot voting or anything like that. And that can be a very simple process of deciding what to do.
Yeah, in these ideation sessions that you have with the team and everyone will pitch an idea, how would these go? So people would sit together, talk about the problem and then propose ideas on the spot, or do people get time to think and prepare, like pitch for their idea?
Mm-hmm. So the question is, would you do one big session where you talk about the problem and come up with ideas and decide which to do, or do people get time beforehand, right? Yeah. I think ideally people get time beforehand. That's what I've seen work best. Or that you do 2 separate sessions if you want to do these as team or as mob sessions, right? And maybe you want to variate a little bit between people individually pitching things and people doing this as a team. And then you bring those to a meeting. And that meeting is about pitching ideas and deciding what to do. You can also, when you get bigger and more advanced and want to do this for a longer point of time, you can also start even earlier by figuring out what is your focus area, what might be a customer problem or a strategic opportunity. There's like different mechanisms you can use there to then define your focus area and what to talk about. But for the growth ideas, I think best practice is people just come up with it beforehand, or you do a session to come up with ideas, and then you do a session where you pitch. Cool. Good. Now moving further down the funnel, the next step is experiment. So we came up with this idea, we want to add an image there, we want to increase the reach out button size, because we believe that will increase the connection people feel to us and they will reach out more. We can execute experiments in different ways. There can be things like marketing campaigns or clever integrations, like the Airbnb one I keep mentioning. All of these can be growth experiments in the end. The thing we witnessed today is something called an A/B test. So we just have two versions of the same thing, and we're going to compare in the end which one performs better. And since I'm a developer, here's a warning, there's now going to be 6 lines of code. Because I just can't do this talk without talking about how we do this. So if we want to have an allocation into groups, we probably just have some mechanism that gives us a random group that the user is in. For an A/B test, then we check, are you in the experiment group? And if you are in the experiment group, we put you into the experiment landing page. If you're not, we put you into the normal landing page. And that is how the thing you participated in earlier was implemented. Something that is very important when you run experiments is to have the right mindset. Because our goal is ultimately to learn. Our goal is definitely not to develop features. Even though we have developers on the team, that is definitely not our goal, right? Our goal is to learn something. Our goal is to learn, thus increasing the connection with our users, really motivate them to reach out more. Or does that different order of the login buttons or sign up buttons, like maybe we put sign up with Google on top, does that really get more users to sign up? And then that should be the responsibility of the growth team, to do that learning and to give that to other teams who actually take care of the product, who are responsible for that, who then implement that. And this can of course cause friction. One company I was working at as a growth developer, we were working in other teams' repositories, and as growth developers we didn't care about code quality, we didn't care about testing, we didn't care about styling conventions, we didn't care about anything that proper developers do. We cared about deploying something into production for half our user base for maybe 10 days that would work and give us a learning. And that made some other teams really upset until we got our own little folder where we could just be messy freaks, and then they could live with that. But this is a really important mindset to have at this stage, because anything that you develop for a growth experiment will be thrown away. It's not built to be put into production. It's built to generate a learning. So when we're running experiments, really consider everything as an experiment. Just run things that you think could be an improvement and figure out if they are, and really have that mindset of learning while you run experiments. Yes?
How do you decide about the duration of an experiment?
Ooh, we will get to that. So the question was, what do you do if you don't see a difference between your A and your B group? We'll see if we maybe discuss that later today when we analyze today's experiment. But well, then you learned that your idea is not worth it, right? So if we don't see an improvement today, then we learned that, well, people don't reach out more if we put an image there. Then we might still run with that idea of connection and have a different experiment around it, but we just learned that this is not a good way. Always coming back to that, learnings are the thing that we produce. Yeah.
Just 2 types of tests, because like 3 or 4 types of tests in parallel.
So the question is, do we have just 2 types of tests, or do we do multiple in parallel? I'm going to try to answer that as I understand it. So there's the A/B test. There could also be tests with 3 versions, right? Is that where your idea is going? Yeah. Not so much, because it gets harder to execute, it gets a bit harder to reason about, and it also takes longer to run the experiment. We're going to come to analyzing in a bit. But you could, of course, run multiple A/B tests in your product. That would be possible. Yeah.
Was there a specific reason that you had a separate growth team and like not the normal developer also run the experiments?
So the question is, was there a specific reason that we had a growth team? I think many companies that have a growth team have it because the growth team can focus on it. They can learn how to do this, and they can then teach the rest of the company. But there's also companies like Facebook that have entire departments dedicated to this sort of process and mindset. So it depends. But I think it's always a good kickoff. if you're not doing this as a company yet. Okay. Now we're coming to analyzing our experiment. So the analysis is at the end. And for this, we need to know our metric, right? So we need to know what was it that we want to track, that we now want to analyze. In our example case, it's going to be conversion on the click. And only a small fraction of the experiments that you run will make it into production. That's why I think the funnel is actually an accurate representation. We have an immense amount of input. From that, we generate a lot of ideas. Then we execute on as many experiments as we can. And some of them we're going to analyze, really give us a good growth opportunity, and then we're going to implement them. So if the internet is not failing us, we're going to now see the results of today. They look a bit like this. Oh, very nice. So we had a total of 37 participants. Thank you very much. 17 of which were put into the control group, and 20 ended up in the experiment group. We're going to assume that's half-half, right? With bigger numbers, this will even out. And in the control group, 5 of the 17 people actually clicked on the reach out button, which equals a conversion of 29%. In the experiment groups, 7 people clicked, which is 35%, and that's an improvement of 20%. What a nice number. What you will notice immediately, we're always talking about relative improvement. So we're not talking about percentage points improvements, right? That would be 6 percentage points improved here, but we're talking about relative improvements, because that is really what helps us to measure the impact of a change we're doing. And then when we analyze the results of an experiment, the question, and we had that come up here already, is how long do we run it? And the answer to that is until it is significant. So maybe ask some data people about this, right? I'm not an expert on that, but at some point we reach statistical significance. So we have a confidence interval for this of like 80 or 95%. We try to go for 95, but 80 might be good enough for a business decision, because then we can run 3 days less. And we check, is the result really significant, or could this just happen by chance? For that, I would also suggest to always run your experiment a couple of days or a week. Definitely not just the weekend, right? And probably also know the seasonality of your product. If, for example, you're selling heated clothes in Sweden, where it's cold in the winter, and you make an experiment in November, of course you're going to see an increase, because that's when people start buying, right? Because it gets cold. So know the seasonality that your product has. Maybe you're always selling more over Christmas, or things like this, and just try to get those effects out of your analysis. And be aware that small wins will compound. So we see on the left a little graph that illustrates a monthly increase of 5% relative to the months before that, right? So we start out with 100%, we go to 105, and then we don't go to 110, we go to like 112. And at the end of the year, we're going to be at 180. So if we grow by 5% every month, we're going to grow by 80% in the course of a year. These small wins, they compound. And small wins can be something like putting the Google login button on top. That I've seen cases where that was a 5 to 7% increase in something. And these really small things, when you add them on top of each other, they really do matter for the bottom line. So, when you analyze your experiments, keep in mind that the growth team delivers learnings, that you probably want a data person on your team to tell you when the results are significant, or use an online tool to tell you when it is significant, and figure out what you learned. Okay, we're going to take one. Yes.
I think it's a short question. You mentioned like seasonal changes and you should watch out for
Mm-hmm.
the moment you're testing, but wouldn't A/B testing kind of work around that problem? Because I mean, you're still checking, you're still in the control. You're still decoupled from seasonal changes.
Yeah, it does work a bit around that, yeah. But it could also be that when you have a So the question was, don't A/B tests work around the seasonality because both groups experience the seasonality? That is true to a degree, but there still might be some impact that when the seasonality is very steep, like Christmas is the prime example, right? That then, I don't know, the connection thing really connects more because you're in the festive spirits. And that's just something to look out for. You're right that the A/B tests actually catch that a little bit, and that's also why you can run multiple A/B tests in parallel, because all groups are gonna have the same division of people who experienced the previous experiment in a certain way. Yeah.
How do you document your findings? Because at some point you will have carried out 500 experiments, and then in the end you don't know if you already tested it.
Very important question. How do you document your findings? So there's dedicated tools for growth hacking actually by now that you can use to document your ideas. I've so far most often seen it in Confluence, right? Or some sort of wiki system that you have, and then there's usually 1 or 2 people on the team who are very familiar with the tests and who can quickly tell you whether you've done it before or not. Good. Before we come to some practical tips of how you can start applying this today, let's look at the entire process one more time to recap. In the beginning, we find a focus area to gather input and gather dedicated helpful input. From that, we generate a bunch of ideas, a whole Miro board full, that we then prioritize to decide which experiments we run. After that, we analyze the experiments that we have run to find the ones that we implement, and then we repeat to learn. And the beauty here is that at the end of this process, we have really learned that something is useful. We are not sitting there as a company depending on the whim of, I don't know, our founder or somebody who comes up with, oh, this is what we should do. But we actually tested that this is what we should do. We can tell a product team that, hey, if you really invest into this feature, we've shown that it gets you a 10-20% increase. And I really want to encourage to apply this mindset of experimenting with ideas that you have to everything. Marketing campaigns, maybe even to user feedback or your team's goals, or also just your company policies. Maybe you could come up with an experiment to figure out what is it that people really want or that would motivate people, instead of saying, hey, we're going to start doing this to make people more happy. Maybe you can find that out beforehand. One word of warning though, this takes commitment. There's beautiful books and articles and videos that will tell you, hey, growth hacking is really cool, and I agree with that part. And then they will continue with, oh, just do this and next week you're gonna have 30% more users. But that's usually not how it happens. Most teams need like 3 to 6 months to get comfortable with doing it and learning how to do this in your environment, in your stack, and how to collaborate with other teams, how to break down some silos and get all the infos. Maybe you don't have all the infos. Maybe you're not doing tracking. And that really does take some commitment. But you can start applying it today. You get a team, or you just get a few people who are really interested and who you are, I don't know, willing to do this over a coffee. You make sure that you have some measurements. Maybe you have some analytics in place. Maybe you can go into the database, see sales reports, or anything, right? There's probably something that you're measuring already, but make sure you measure it. Then come up with growth ideas. And I would really encourage you to do this in a lightweight fashion at first. Maybe just sit down over coffee, get a Franzbrötchen as we do in Hamburg, right? Or anything, and just write down the 5 ideas that are already on the top of your mind, give them a little rating, decide on one, try it. Run your experiment, right? And that can be super lightweight. The thing that you saw today, I built that entire thing in an afternoon, including the tracking system and everything that just logs to some online service where the data gets stored, and then I have a real-time connection to that to see how my audience is doing. And probably have an engineer who can do the same. Or you have already some measuring in place that you can use. And then learn from it. Learn whether your idea works, what you can do with it, and most importantly, enjoy growing. Thank you very much.